looked into business from Donbas and Luhansk, stayed, and they left. So what I can say that from the very beginning, like in the first chaotic months of the crisis, of the military escalation, business was trying to figure out what was going on. The business was not an active political actor on neither side, I would say. So business people who had something to lose, assets, and clients and money and capital and finances, especially after the bank transactions became impossible, they left. So I would say that medium and slightly upper medium business group, they left to the government-controlled territories or to Russia, much less to Russia, I would say. Those who had their equipment, their factories, their workshops, their buildings, real estate, they were caught in a truly difficult situation because this was all that they had, so to speak, and they could not transport, they could not disassemble their equipment and take it to a safer place, so to speak. So in the end, some decided to abandon all their business. Some decided to re-register it with someone who stayed there. Some other businesses left their businesses to their parents, to their relatives, etc., to wait and see. For the majority of business companies, small and medium, that I interviewed on the side of non-government controlled territories, they stayed simply because they couldn't leave, right? Because stories of IDP entrepreneurs were not all that rosy and successful either. Few, I would say, very few stayed because of ideological convictions. Overall, business in Donbas, people whom I spoke to, are rather apolitical. What they care about is transparency, is clear rules, possibility to do business, to keep connections, etc. All were very much upset about the blockade, and I refer to the blockade introduced early on in the conflict and not the recent official blockade. Ban on commercial transactions and on taking cargo across the line of contact, except the list of the enterprises whose raw materials were of key importance for strategic industry in Ukraine.
And you also write that there are some moral and ethical dilemmas for the people who are willing to do business, especially those based in the occupied territories of the Donbas. What are these dilemmas and to what extent they are influencing?
I spoke to individuals, quite many, and their stories were quite typical. By and large, in Donetsk, they do not have loyalty to the local authorities or de facto authorities, so to speak. They do have loyalty to their place. So they felt they could not abandon it because, if they leave, what would happen to Donetsk? In Luhansk, this local patriotism, so to speak, is as strong. However, in Luhansk, what we can see today, they're drifting further and further away from Kiev, much further than Donetsk, and they somehow grew to believe in the future of their republic. At least they refer to our young republic, we will do whatever. In terms of the affinity to Kiev, it's a problem for all. Because they felt that they were abandoned. I mean, it's a very common narrative that they waited that somehow this conflict will be resolved very soon, very quickly, But then they saw that Kiev was not, in their opinion, was not very much motivated to resolve it quickly, and instead it's a long-lasting war. Now low intensity, but who knows whether it can escalate. So these people found themselves between a rock and a hard place, so to speak.
And what is their willingness to go on cooperation with the rest of Ukraine, and as well, to what extent the Ukrainian goods and everything is substituted? By what is substituted? What kind of job those people have?
Well, in early months and a couple of years right after 2014. irrespective of the ban, thanks to ubiquitous corruption, goods were going back and forth, right? And Ukrainian goods were common in supermarkets and other places in the NGC, non-government-controlled areas. However, it was becoming more and more increasingly risky business because crossing a line of contact was never risk-free, so to speak. And although people sort of knew about the so-called tariffs that they had to pay at checkpoints, on both sides, by the way, rules may have changed, right? So this created a sense of insecurity. So that's why what my first study showed in 2015, entrepreneurs in Luhansk, Donetsk, very reluctantly, but quite quickly, reorientated towards Russian supplies. They would all say that the minute the situation normalizes and things become as they used to be, they would immediately restore business relations with Ukrainian partners because they still preferred Ukrainian goods and Ukrainian services to the Russian ones, of course. Now, what happened now in 2016? In Donetsk, businesses are still quite happy to trade with the rest of Ukraine or Ukrainian partners, Ukrainian companies. In Luhansk, the process seems to go, I wouldn't say irreversible, but quite far from the departure point, and the narrative became that we cannot trust the quality of Ukrainian products, we cannot trust Ukrainian partners, etc. So we prefer Russian supplies. So that's. This is what blockade and isolation normally does to human relations. Because business is an important, not only economically, but also in terms of people's interaction, right? And combating myths and stereotypes.
How about the big business? And also, we knew that Donbas is a heavily industrialized place. So it can't be compared to South Ossetia or Transnistria or any other this kind of frozen conflict republic in post-Soviet space. Because those are the smaller territories. Somewhere there are more, let's say, agricultural places. That was a heavy industry. It requires really, this region lives from the big contracts, import, export. It's not that a couple of people can do that. And it requires some of the legality. To what extent, generally the whole shape of the way the region is financed had changed, and also what is the role of the oligarchs? What's happening with their business, of those who actually own the region?
Right question. Well, Donbas, Donetsk and Luhansk, they were net exporters as opposed to other regions of Ukraine. So they were the major exporters of coal, of steel, and other stuff, and the source of hard currency that was coming into Ukraine, by the way. In order to export, one needs legality, right? One needs a certificate of origin, etc. Therefore, for enterprises to continue their export, they had to retain their Ukrainian registration. That was not easy, as you can understand, and some just preferred just to close their enterprises. Some others opened, companies in Russia. Very few, but still, there were companies like that, companies in Russia, and were exporting through the new Russian companies. But the majority of big mines and metal, steel production under Rinat Akhmetov, for instance, they retained they changed their registration from Donetsk to Kramatorsk, for example, in the government-controlled territories, and continued export in a legal way. Again, because there was an exception, they were exempt from the ban on commercial cargo activities, right? So they were allowed to take their coal out and to take steel in, or the other way around, right? So this interesting scheme was functioning until March 2017, when first it was a spontaneous blockade by some individuals and battalions, and then it was nationalization, so to speak, or external management introduced to these big companies, and then there was an official decree of the president, right, about the official blockade. So now these assets are lost, and it's not very clear whether they operate. Some of them do, but clearly the volume of production is much less, simply because even keeping afloat these huge enterprises requires a lot of money. There were attempts on behalf of the de factos to come and make some mines and factories to pay taxes in the so-called republics, which they refused to do because they need clean reputation in order to be exporters, right? Besides, they had all this huge staff, miners and workers who were paid on their Ukrainian accounts, right? So now it's very unclear what's going on in terms of how operational are the mines and enterprises. Some mines are flooded, so it's a very sad story. What I know from what I heard, that coal goes via Russian ports to Turkey and to other places, or even returns to Ukraine as a Russian coal via an official Ukrainian-Russian border.